Welcome back to the second episode of this week for ghosts, and we're just going to be giving out ghost stories for the week. This will be the same thing for next week as well. There'll be no discussion because we pretty much covered most of the topic from the previous video.
Correct.
So hopefully you enjoy the coming stories. These are some of our favorites. If you enjoyed it, let us know which one was your favorite. And if you have anything similar, comment down below. Bye-bye.
The Windigo. A wealthy man wanted to go to hunting in part of northern Canada, where few people have ever hunted. He traveled to a trading post and tried to find a guide to take him, but no one would do it. It was too dangerous, they said. Finally, he found an Indian who needed money badly, and he agreed to take him. The Indian's name was De Fago. They made a camp in the snow near a large frozen lake. For 3 days they hunted, but they had nothing to show it for. The third night, a windstorm came up. They lay in their tent, listening to the wind howling at the trees, whipping back and forth. To see the storm better, the hunter opened the tent flap. What he saw startled him. There wasn't a breath of air stirring, and the trees were standing perfectly still. Yet he could hear the wind howling. And the more he listened, the more it sounded like if it were calling Da Figo's name. Da Figo. It called Da Figo. I must be losing my mind, the hunter thought. But Da Figo had gotten out of his sleeping bag. He was huddled in a corner in the tent. He heard his head buried in his arms. What's this all about? The hunter asked. It's nothing, Da Figo said. But the wind continued to call to him, and Da Figo became more tense and more restless. Da Figo, it called. Da Figo. Suddenly he jumped to his feet, and he began to run from the tent, but the hunter grabbed him and wrestled him to the ground. You can't leave me out here, the hunter shouted. Then the wind called again, and Da Figo broke loose and ran to the darkness. The hunter could hear him scream as he went. Again and again he cried, "Oh, my fiery feet! My burning feet of fire!" Then his voice faded away, and the wind died down. At daybreak, the hunter followed Da Figo's tracks in the snow. They went through the woods, down towards the lake, then onto the ice. But soon he noticed something strange. The steps Da Figo had taken got longer and longer. They were so long that no human being could have taken them. It was as if something had helped him to hurry away. The hunter followed the tracks out through the middle of the lake, but then they disappeared. At first he thought Da Figo had fallen through the ice, but there wasn't any hole. Then he thought that something had pulled him off the ice into the sky, but that made no sense. As he stood wondering what happened, the wind picked up again. Soon it was howling as it had the night before. Then he heard Da Figo's voice. It was coming from up above, and again he heard Da Figo screaming, "My fiery feet! My burning feet!" But there was nothing to be seen. Now the hunter wanted to leave that place as fast as he could. He went back to the camp and packed. Then he left some food for Da Figo, and he started out. Weeks later, he reached civilization. The following year, he went back to hunt in that area again. He went to the same trading post to look for a guide. The people there could not explain what had happened to Da Figo at that night, but he had not seen him since. Maybe it was the Wendigo, one of them said, as he laughed. It's supposed to come with the wind. It's supposed to come with the wind. It drags you along at great speed until you're burned away. And more of you than that. Then it carries you into the sky and it drops you. It's just a crazy story. But that's what some of the Indians say. A few days later, the hunter was at the trading post again. An Indian came in and sat by the fire. He had a blanket wrapped around him, and he wore his hat so that you couldn't see his face. The hunter thought there was something familiar about him. He walked over and asked, "Are you Da Figo?" The Indian didn't answer. "Do you know anything about him?" No answer. He began to wonder if something was wrong, if the man needed help, but he couldn't see his face. "Are you all right?" he asked. No answer. To get a look at him, he lifted the Indian's hat. Then he screamed, as there was nothing under the hat but a pile of ashes. the haunted house. One time, a preacher went to see if he could put a haunt to rest at a house in the settlement. The house had been haunted for about 10 years. Several people had tried to stay there all night, but they always would get scared out by the haunt. So this preacher took his Bible and went to the house, went on in, built himself a good fire, and lit a lamp. Sat there, reading the Bible. Then, just before midnight, he heard something start up in the cellar, walking back and forth, back and forth. Then, it sounded like somebody was trying to scream and got choked off. Then there was a lot of thrashing around and struggling, and finally, everything got quiet. The old preacher took up his Bible again, but before he could start reading, he heard footsteps coming up the cellar stairs. He sat watching the door to the cellar, and the footsteps kept coming closer and closer. He saw the doorknob turn, and when the door began to open, he jumped up and hollered, "What do you want?" The door shut back easy like, and there wasn't a sound. The preacher was trembling a little, but he finally opened the Bible and read a while. Then he got up and laid the book on the chair and went to mending the fire. Then the haunt started walking again, and step, 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 up the cellar stairs. The old preacher sat watching the door, saw the doorknob turn and the door open. It looked like a young woman. He backed up and said, "Who are you? What do you want?" The haunt sort of swayed like she didn't know what to do. Then she just faded out. The old preacher waited, and when he didn't hear any more noises, he went over and shut the door. He was sweating and trembling all over, but he was a brave man, and he thought that he'll be able to see it through. So he turned his chair where he could watch, and he sat down and waited. It wasn't long before he heard the haunt start up again, slowly. Step, 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 step. Closer and closer. Step, step. And it was right at the door. The preacher stood up and held his Bible out before him. Then the knob slowly turned, and the door opened wide. This time the preacher spoke quiet-like. He said, "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, who are you and what do you want?" The haunt came right across the room, straight to him, and took off his coat. It was a young woman, about 20 years old. Her hair was torn and tangled, and the flesh was dropping off her face, so he could see the bones and part of her teeth. She had no eyeballs. There was sort of a blue light back in their eye sockets, and she had no nose to her face. Then she started talking. It sounded like her voice was coming in and going with the wind blowing it. She told how her lover had killed her for her money and buried her in the cellar. She said if the preacher would dig up her bones and bury her properly, she could rest. Then she told him to take the end joint of the little finger of her left hand and lay it on the collection plate at the next church meeting, and he'd find out who had murdered her. And she said, if you come back here once more after that, you'll hear my voice at midnight, and I'll tell you where the money is hid, and you can give it to the church. The haunt sobbed like she was tired, and she sunk towards the floor and was gone. The preacher found the bones and buried them in the graveyard. The next Sunday, the preacher pulled the finger bone in the collection plate, and when a certain man happened to touch it, it stuck to his hand. The man jumped up and rubbed and scraped and tore at the bone, trying to get it off. Then he went to screaming like he was going crazy. Well, he confessed to the murder, and they took him to jail. After the man was hung, the preacher went back to that house at midnight. The haunt's voice told him to dig under the hearth rock. He did, and he found a big sack of money. And where the haunt had held onto his coat, the print of those bony fingers was burned right into the cloth. It never did